propagationists, and that will be her topic this morning. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Well, I'm really glad to be here. First thing I'm going to say is let's turn on the lights. And I kind of want to move this back because I'm not going to use this. Just put it right here. I look out here and I see many people who know a lot about propagation. Rick Webb, who is waving at me.
I just wanted to say hey.
Hey, Rick. You know, I just see all kind of people who know a lot about propagation, a lot of people who have taught me a lot of things. And so we've got a great crowd here to talk about. Oh, okay. All right. So we got a lot of people here to answer questions if y'all have questions about anything in particular. But anyway, I'm going to basically, my plan is to kind of give you my little basic spiel, a little intro about plant propagation. And then we are going to talk about cuttings. I'm going to show y'all some cuttings and my little setup that I use to root cuttings at my place. And we'll divide some plants and do some root cuttings. And then we're going to talk about seed after that. Now, I think if I'm remembering correctly, I have 45 minutes. So I think I need a timekeeper here, somebody who Bud has offered to flag me when I have 5 minutes left, because I taught 13th to 14th grade for a long time, 26 years. I taught horticulture in a community college, and I lived my life in 50-minute increments. So it's going to be really hard for me not to, and longer, and so it's going to be really hard for me to know when to stop at 45. So if we'll do that, I'll be grateful. All right, first of all, how many of y'all propagate plants here? All right, that's a good group. That's about a third of the folks that are here. When you talk about propagation, really the first thing that you got to think about is that there's two main ways to propagate plants: sexual and asexual. Asexual is also called vegetative. With asexual propagation, you're actually cloning a plant. You're making an exact copy of it. And if you have a little backyard nursery, we're not talking tissue culture or anything like that. If you root a cutting, or you take a division, or you layer a plant even, it's going to be exactly the same as the plant that you started with. Okay? So if you want a copy, that's what you need to do. When you start talking about sexual propagation, you're talking about seed propagation. And every seed has got two parents and a little embryo on the inside. So think about that the next time you eat red beans. So when you plant a seed, you are going to have input, genetic input. Did I just ruin red beans for you? When you plant a seed, you may get some genetic input from a plant you've never seen. So if you want an exact copy, seed is not the best way to go. But with seed, you get something really wonderful, especially for native plant people. You get biodiversity. So, you know, just like Fred was talking about the azaleas, all of those different color forms happen because of biodiversity within that species. And so you can get all kind of different things. One thing that's really important you can plant out 50 seeds, and some terrible disease can come along, and it may kill 49 of them, and you may have one seedling that can resist the disease or resist whatever pest you're talking about. So biodiversity is really good. It can include things like, you know, different height, disease resistant, pest resistance, flower color, fragrance, drought tolerance, and all kind of things that we see when you look at populations in the wild. So what I figured I'd do is start out for a minute. I'm going to move these two over here, these things over here. Is this where they need to go? Oh, there's more stuff. Okay, my stuff is on the end here. Now, when I taught 13th and 14th grade, I had a greenhouse. I had a mist bench. And I could root stuff all the time. And I've been retired for about 5 years now. It's kind of been at first kind of a, rude awakening for me. I have to take cuttings now when the plants don't have real tender leaves. So what I mostly do are hardwood cuttings. And that's something anybody can do in a backyard. And I have stuck a couple of cuttings right here. This is an oak leaf hydrangea, and it is a name variety that Bud really likes, and I really like, called Sim's Beauty. And what I did, have you ever heard the expression, she can root a pencil? Okay, that's basically kind of what it looks like when you do a hardwood cutting. It's about pencil length. It needs to be recent growth from the last year. In other words, if you take a cutting, a big long section of wood and you're cutting it into cuttings, the older wood that was formed a couple of years ago is not going to root probably. In fact, they say if this was 2-year-old wood down here and this was formed last year, this would be the place to take your cutting where those two come together. You'd have your best results. But it needs to have several sets of buds on it. It needs to be basically something like this. Okay, and what I'll do is I will, you can do this in the ground, or you can do it in, a pot like I'm doing here. So what you're going to do is you're just going to stick a couple of nodes down in the ground, and then you're going to leave it outdoors, okay? And leaving it outdoors, there's two things you got to be careful with. First of all, you do not want your cutting to dry out. You think, well, it doesn't have any leaves, but it will lose buds if it dries out. So you need to put something on top. This is my little modified humidity dome here that will go on top. Just sink that down further. And then you kind of sink it around the cuttings. And then if you come out and you look at it and you've got condensation, you just take the top off and vent it or whatever. Okay? And usually I do most of my hardwood cuttings around December, something like that. One more thing I forgot to mention. If the sun ever hits this, your cuttings will cook. So I always put something on top like this. And then basically you walk away, you leave it. Once in a while you check it for water. You could do the same thing you could till up a little bed like you were going to do a row in a vegetable garden. You could do the same thing. So you can root cuttings directly in the ground. That's fine too. I was telling Bud, I experimented around this year. This is not a native plant. This is a rose. Get the dirt off the bottom of it. I saw a friend that I hadn't seen in a long time. I used to have a nursery, and I saw this friend of mine at a Christmas party, and he said, "You remember that rose I gave you that you used to sell?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "I lost it. I don't have it anymore. Can you give it back to me?" And I said, "Yes." But then I forgot about it for a while. So I realized it's almost time to stop taking hardwood cuttings, and I hadn't taken his cuttings yet. So I read up, and they say that you can make, the first thing that happens when you root a cutting is you get callus on the bottom, okay? It's this little lumpy white growth that doesn't look white anymore because this has been in the dirt. So I read somewhere that you can take cuttings, hardwood cuttings, roll them up in damp newspaper, put them in a Ziploc bag and leave them at room temperature, and that they will callus quicker, and then that means right after callusing they'll root. So that's what I did with this. And this rose made callus in 2 weeks. So I'm going to try that with some more stuff. Because usually what I do is I just stick the cuttings directly in the ground, and it takes a longer time for them to callus. But if anybody wants to see what callus looks like, we'll pass that around or whatever. But anyway, so one of y'all had success with doing cuttings on. Has anybody got any thoughts or comments they want to make? All right. Well, we will move on. So that's my cutting procedure right there. All recycled material.
You don't ever use hormones?
You can, but it's not necessary. What hormones do is they make you have maybe more quantity of roots, and sometimes a little quicker rooting. So I do sometimes, but it's not really necessary. The most important thing about cuttings is taking them at the right time. And if I had a mist bench, probably I'd do most of my rootings in early summer, late spring, early summer. But I don't have a mist bench, so I don't do that anymore. Yes.
The callus forms after you have put it in the soil?
Yes, it does. So it's kind of like that. It's trying to seal over, to seal the wound, and then it'll make this little lump of cells, and then the cells differentiate into roots. So they're precursors to rooting.
To soil and fertility, what's best for rooting?
On rooting, it's got to be well drained, but still hold some moisture. And you're not really concerned with fertility until the plant gets some roots. So that's not a real big
Would
concern.
high fertility kind of impede that?
If it was such high fertility it was salty, it might. But otherwise, I would say it wouldn't. But it's a waste of fertilizer, basically, because the plant can't take the fertilizer in. So usually, I know a whole lot of people commercially who root in just ground up pine bark, you know. This is commercial potting soil I'm using. So
And the ladies in our area use sand.
sand works great. That's a good point. Okay, so sand would be really good as well, because you've got your drainage. It's not real high fertility, and sand will still hold some water. Okay. And now, if that roots when I get it back, I can tell my friend that like 70 people have handled that one. That might give it some kind of magic quality. Okay, while we're talking about cloning, let's talk about division. So this is a Stokes aster right here. It's a variety that we first introduced in my nursery called Peachy's Pick. So I could dig this up out of the ground, or I could just get a container plant. And I'm thinking what I want is maybe a volunteer from the audience. So what we're going to do here is Mark is going to use the saw. He's going to divide these into parts. And then if anybody does not, Peachy's Pick is a great Stokes aster. Peachy's Pick was introduced by my nursery. My friend Peachy Saxon was growing the plant, and the plant was actually people always say, oh, is it peach colored? No, it's not. That's just her name. It is a regular colored, but it's sturdy stems and a longer blooming period, and I think it's a superior form. So I've got these bags here. If anybody doesn't have Peachy's Pick and wants to take one home, you can speak to Mr. Pastrick here and put a division in a bag and take it.
Marcus, Stokesian, get after it, dude, get after it.
Now, the interesting thing also about Stokes aster, this doesn't work with all plants.
Is that all you need?
No, these two. Okay, the interesting thing about Stokesia is that also it will grow from root cuttings. So right here we got these spaghetti noodle looking roots. If you planted this in the ground, this would root and it would still be a clone. Okay, so and you can do root cuttings from just about anything that tends to make suckers off the roots. But in particular this, and what I'll do is when you're, like if I was dividing plants when I got done, as you see up there with Mark, you're going to have this pile of dirt and all these roots that broke off. I would just throw that into a flat, lightly cover it with soil, and then within usually it goes through the winter, and in the spring, all of a sudden you start seeing these little baby Stokes asters coming up. So that's a really good way to get your clone again if you're into the idea of cloning some plants. All right?
You just want to divide these in half.
Yeah. Unless you think they need more division. You're in charge here. All right. Now, next we're going to talk a little bit about seed. And I'm going to leave Mark over here and let y'all discuss with him who gets these Stokes asters. But when you start talking about seed and fruit, you get into all this whole thing about how, a fruit, probably you're familiar with grocery store fruit. Those are fleshy fruits. And you, what you're doing when you propagate is you're doing the exact opposite of what you do when you cook. You're throwing away the pulp and you're keeping the seed. But you use a lot of the same kind of cooking utensils and things like that. But when you're talking about plant fruit, generally you got a couple of different types that you can have. A lot of plants don't have pulpy fruit at all. That's what we're used to because that's what we like to eat. A lot of plants have dry fruit. So I've got several examples here I'm going to pass around, talk about them before I do. To me, here we go. I got a lot of them. Plants that follow. Basically, if the fruit falls apart when you get to the end of the life cycle, it's kind of like dry. It's called dry shattering fruit. I believe that botanically it's called this. Okay. So I've got several things here. Here's a great example right here. This is a beard tongue, a penstemon, and you can see the actual fruit cluster here. And all this stuff that looks like tiny little like fleas or something in there, that's all stuck to the plastic because of static electricity, that is your seed. So I'm going to pass several of different types of fruit around for y'all to kind of look at. And at the end of, let's see what else I got here. I got all kinds of stuff. At the end, you can just bring them back up wherever they end up. Asters. All of the plants that have flowers that look like daisies. You've got your aster here with a little bit of fluff on it, and the seeds are falling to the bottom. So basically on your dry fruits, and this is why so few gardens have dried fruit, a lot of people are real meticulous and they're into deadheading. Well, as soon as the plant flowers, it's going to require several more weeks to make the fruit, and at maturity that fruit is going to be brown. Okay? Native azaleas. I'm not sure there's any seed left in here, but a lot of people say, oh, I didn't know azaleas had any fruit. But they have a capsule that splits open. It's got little tiny seeds. Here's another one. You can see the seed on this a little bit better. This is a liatris, button liatris. And what you're seeing here that is the actual seed, these little dark things almost look like miniature nuts, and they even call them nutlets. Here's a baptisia, all its indigo. So it's going to be like a pod, and you crack it open, and the seed are in there. Let's save that for a minute. Button snake root or orangium. Let's see. Purple coneflower. That's a good one. It looks like nuts again, but they're tan. And the classic example of a shattering fruit, milkweed. This is the Mexican milkweed here, but they all pretty much do the same thing. They pop open, come out, and then here's another interesting one. Amsonia. The thing at the bottom that looks like a little separate stick is the seed. And one more. A pineland hibiscus. Right here, Hibiscus culeatus, which I thought was a selection they made in SFA, but Greg says no, because it's kind of a dwarf plant. But it really looks like okra, is what it looks like. And then I would mention native grasses. You're going to get them when you touch that grass cluster, run your hand through it, and everything just falls apart. It's ready to get seed from. There you go. And last but not least, seed for oak leaf hydrangeas. And this gives you a chance to look close at it. All of these little things that look like a paper cutout are sterile flowers. They don't make any seed. And the next time you see an oak leaf hydrangea flower, if you look close, these little things that are dark here, that are littler, smaller than a BB, smaller than the head of a pin, that's where your seed are going to be. Now, so let's say that you collected some of these things and you wanted to get the seed out of them so you could plant them. Let's start with an easy one, the hibiscus. Oops. Now, when I do, I think these will go through there. I use, first of all, when you collect dry fruit, I passed all these Ziploc bags around just so people could see through them. You're gonna collect, if you collect some seed of dry, that has, a plant that has dry fruit, you're gonna put it in a brown paper bag or some kind of paper bag. You know, sometimes I'll want to collect seed, I'll be out somewhere and I'll have to drag a fast food bag or something off the floor of my car. But paper, not plastic, for seed saving. So here's my hibiscus. It goes into this colander, and then I'm just kind of shaking it, and it's coming out the bottom. Very simple. Although you can really just hand pick this because it's the seeds are so big. Now I've got some seed containers up here, so if any of these things that we're cleaning, if anybody wants to take anything home, you can feel free to do that. Okay? So here is our hibiscus. Anybody want to see if they can get a few more seed out of this? All right. Now, and the other great thing is that you can use old kitchen stuff like this. We closed my mom's house down, and this is a bowl that we had food in all the time. And it's an old plastic bowl, and I don't want to use it in my kitchen anymore because it's just so old and discolored. But every time I clean seed in, I think about my mama. So, anyway. So we're going to, okay, our hydrangea. You might say, well, why in the world would I want to grow a hydrangea from seed? People are intimidated by little seed. So, all you do is get a little a screen colander, and you just put your hydrangea flower in there. You shake it around. The reddish colored little things. You have to believe. These are hydrangea seeds.
I want to believe.
So, you know, isn't that amazing that that's going to grow into my hydrangea? I guess I could pass this around. Just keep shaking the colander when you get it. So, a lot of people think, well, I don't want to deal with any small seed, but small seed are actually easier if you have a screen colander. You just dump it in, everything falls through that seed, everything else stays in your little colander or screen, and you're good to go. Okay?
And then you plant them one by one.
Yeah. Well, we're going to talk about planting in a minute. Oh, here's a fun thing. One of my friends who's a botanist over in Jackson, this is true southern catalpa. A lot of our catalpas are northern catalpa. And this is a real easy one. If you know somebody, this is a real good one for kids. Because it's pretty much, I've released all of them already. It's pretty much guaranteed, you know, that it's going to grow. And if you take one of these out and feel it, it feels kind of hard in the middle, and that's your seed. So.
You know, when I was a kid, we used to smoke those beans.
Did you? Here. Okay. So if anybody wants catalpa seed, I've got some of those. So here's a good one for Louisiana. This is sweet coneflower. Do y'all grow, does anybody grow this? It's a tall Rebecca daisy. And this is a very nice form that came from, I don't know if it came from Charles Allen directly, but it came from the Cajun Prairie. Mark brought me seed and I grew it. And it gets big. They don't all get that tall, but it's beautiful. And it's got kind of subtomentosa. Rebecca subtomentosa.
Bright yellow in August.
Yeah. And mine tends to bloom, it's got a long blooming period. In fact, this particular one that I got the seed off of has a longer blooming period than any of the others I've gotten other places. But this doesn't necessarily mean that this seed will produce such a plant, but it's a real long blooming season, real sturdy stems, tall, and just tons of flowers. So if anybody wants to take home some seed, this came from Louisiana, this might be a good one for you to take, right here.
And the leaves are fragrant.
Are they? See, I've always wondered why they called it sweet coneflower. Because I smelled the flowers and they didn't smell like anything.
I think I can get the fragrance from here, from
Okay. It's faint.
It's you, the leaf, and you smell it further away than you do up close.
Okay. So this is a good one for y'all from Louisiana. Milkweed. Interesting, if I can find my milkweed. So a lot of people are interested. We've been talking about monarchs and all that kind of stuff. And what I have here is Mexican milkweed, which they say now is not necessarily the best milkweed for monarchs if you're way down south and it never goes dormant. But where I am, you know, it does go dormant. But what in the world are you going to do with something like this? Okay? You get this out and you put it in a heat-proof pan, like a little metal pie pan or something like that. You light a match to this, it goes poof, just like magic, and you have only seed, no fluff left. Okay. And I really wanted to do it in here, but I thought, you know, if I set off the smoke alarm and everybody off, that would not be good. But that's basically what you do. And I've had a lot better luck with milkweeds if I give them some cool moist treatment. So this is a native milkweed in here. It's a green milkweed, which is one of the favorite ones for monarchs. And what I did is I basically soaked the seed overnight, and then you can put it in potting soil or whatever, but I wrapped this up in a paper towel. As you can see. Just see if I can get to the seed. And you can see them in here, but I wrapped them up real good. So here are my little seed, all plump, waiting to sprout. And, you know, they did have the fluff on them, and I did nothing in the world but take a match to them. I was reading the other day that it's not just the fire, that smoke is supposed to enhance sprouting on some plants. So, and I was always wondering if milkweed was one of those. But these are all green milkweed seed. If anybody wants to take a few to try them, yes ma'am.
Does it need to be
Well, what I did with all those things that are in Ziploc bags, rolled up in paper towels, and several of them up there, I put them in my refrigerator. Well, usually on milkweeds I do a month or so. And you say, well, you know, out on the roadside, if this is growing, nobody put it in the refrigerator. But out there, you also can't go back and find where your seed are. So you could also just as easily get the fluff off, dig a little patch in your garden, and go ahead and plant these seed in the fall and let them just stay there over the winter. That would work just as well. Now there are some things that I really like to overwinter in the refrigerator because rodents really like a lot of plants that I also like dogwoods and magnolias. Rodents will get into your seed and eat every single one. And the last time I checked, there were no rats in my refrigerator. So I will do that, just like a savings account. All winter long, when all these rodents are really hungry, that seed is in my refrigerator. And as soon as the weather breaks and the rats and rat relatives have other things to eat, then I plant it out. Okay. So there's our milkweed.
Gail, does stratification force your seed to germinate kind of uniformly to some extent, or?
I think so. I think it does uniformly, but you know, I was growing, I really wanted to get good population of the orange milkweed started at my house. And I was growing it, and I just really wasn't getting very good results. And when I started trying to chill it for a month, then I had it after that. So,
That's the butterfly milkweed.
yes.
So Gail, that's a good idea to try both ways unless you have a
Yeah,
tree.
try both ways. And the procedure again, if you're gonna do the refrigerated stratification, you basically clean your seed. In the case of milkweed, poof. Okay. Then you soak it overnight in water, and then you drain the water off, and you put it in a plastic bag. And you'll see. Sometimes I'm not real good about labeling things, but I really try to label. Southern sugar maple right here. Okay, so I really try to label things so that I can remember what they are and not get confused and put them in a soup or something. So I'm actually so plant afflicted that I have a special refrigerator for my seeds. So that won't happen. But anyway, you have a what? I have one in my butt. Yeah, there you go. Here's Mexican plum all rolled up in here. So that would be an example of a fleshy or a pulpy fruit. Da, 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 da. I rolled this one good. Okay, that was the outer thing. So here are my plum seeds right here. And it's about time to plant them out. But on a woody plant, a tree or a shrub, the time that it needs chilling is usually about 90 days. So that works out pretty close to a winter where I am, fairly close. And then you can plant them outdoors toward the end of the winter. A Mexican plum. Now, if you're dealing with, well, there's a group of dry seed that do not split open. And that includes a lot of things like oak acorns and buckeyes. Here's a buckeye right here. And even maples and stuff like that. On things like that, again, you're going to collect them when they're brown, but the key on all those things, they have a real high oil content. You need to plant them as soon as possible. I try to collect buckeyes and plant them the same day if I can. Okay? And a buckeye in a gallon pot, if I put 3 buckeye seeds in a gallon pot, the taproot would get to the bottom of that gallon pot before you get any top growth. So I learned that the hard way. But this is a buckeye seed, but it would never in this world sprout. All those ones that people have been carrying around their pocket for good luck for years will not sprout. And now your pulpy fruits, like the Mexican plum. What I do with them, these are palmettos. I try to soak them in water, and once you soak them in water, it's easier to get the pulp off. So I'll soak them in water, I'll rub them against a screen or something, squish them with my fingers, get the pulp off, and then they're ready to process however you choose. Planted directly outdoors or go into the refrigerator. So, what are you going to do? Let's say you can tell by how much time I'm spending on seed versus cuttings what I really love. I love seed propagation because of the diversity you get. But what are you going to do with all these seeds? Let's say you get all inspired, you go out, you collect, you clean, you do all this stuff. You've got several options. You can set yourself up a tiny, tiny little back corner in your garden and actually have a little bitty tiny nursery if you want to, as long as you've got some water, and a place where, you can, you're not going to be highly visible because nurseries are usually not real clean. And, you got your water and you've got a place where you can plant. That would work. You could do something like a section of a garden bed and plant directly in the ground, okay? Or one of my inspirations, Miss Jessie over here, what I learned from her is you're walking around Briarwood with her and she will see some seed that's ready, she'll pick it up, she'll walk around and talk to you and she'll get to what looks like a good spot, she'll scuff the leaves out of the way and then just like magic she'll just throw it out there. And, you're not so likely, you might not get 100% germination that way, but you're getting the seed to a place where it can sprout. And that also works.
Is it better than leaving it on the dryer?
Right.
Or in your pocket and wash your pocket.
And that's the other thing, so when you're collecting, you need like some kind of paper bags, you need, something to write down what you've got. Cause I'm in the habit of get out places, I'll stick seed in my pocket, and then I, throw my clothes in the washer, and then I find the seed in the dryer, you know, and I have been wondering, I think I need a research project about whether it's the delicate cycle or the heavy cycle. But usually it ends up in the lint trap when you do that. So, if you're labeling stuff, one thing I also have learned, and you know, I always say, oh, I'll remember what that is, but I don't. If you're labeling stuff, pencil is better if it's gonna be outdoors in the weather than a Sharpie marker. So, pencil will outlast Sharpie marker by years. So just plan on number 2 pencil and one of these. And if I'm really organized and I'm stratifying some seed in the refrigerator, sometimes I'll go ahead and make my label and put it in there, but I don't always do that. So, but basically, unless y'all have questions about anything specific, that's mostly, and how am I doing on my?
You've got 10 minutes.
10 minutes, yeah. Okay.
But after you plant your seeds, like if you planted them outside in a little section of your garden or something, would you go out and sprinkle them every day to keep them wet, or how would you do that?
You would need to water them some, you know, and once they get a little bit of size on them, if you just did them like in a garden row, and you see, I'm really big in my community garden, so I plant a lot of vegetables. I am heavy-handed. I always have to come back in the vegetable garden and thin them. So if you planted something like the hibiscus seed I had, and they were real thick and crowded, you would need to come back and thin them out so they were spaced. So they were barely touching.
I'm not concerned about the moisture, though.
Well, what I'm saying is if they're crowded, you really are going to have a problem with them getting enough moisture. So if they're spaced out right, you would basically need to water them more than a normal garden bed, but not that much more.
What about just to get them germinated?
Just to get them germinated, you need to keep the soil down.
So every day you have to water them?
Not necessarily every day. Depends on the weather.
Same every day.
So what we're going to say, I'm going to say the same thing. I taught horticulture for a long time, and the big question I got was, how often do I water it? How often do I water it? And my friend who has a garden center in Meridian says, his smart-ass answer is, when it needs it. And that's really the best answer.
Stick your finger in the dirt and it's wet.
When it needs it, and you can tell by the surface of the soil if it's drying out and if it needs it.
Bench or ground? Does it make a difference if you put your seed trays down? If you put them on the ground, should they be up a little bit if you're worried about too wet?
Well, what I've done, money-wise, is got, you know those flats, I think I saw one over here, those web tray flats that are kind of sturdy, as opposed to the solid plastic ones that buckle when you're carrying stuff. Yeah. You can turn one of those upside down and set a flat on it, so it's down on the ground, you don't have to build a bench. But it's elevated about that much, and that improves your drainage. But my back hurts me when I work an area like that very much, so I'm actually thinking about building me a couple of little elevated benches just to save my back. So, but yeah, the trick about the upside down flat and then the seed flat on top of it works real well. But I'm thinking what Rick's getting at, I guess, is probably if you were really, really diligent about watering, you might cause more trouble with too much water. So it's kind of tricky while they're sprouting, but too much water can cause as much problems as not enough.
Could you put that grow cover over it just a little bit to help keep it wet? Or
You could, but when you get green leaves on those seedlings, they need, you know, pretty bright light, or they get real floppy real quick.
I tried to grow some sunflowers one time, and I looked out there and the birds were pecking it out of it.
Oh, yeah. So that would help keep the birds out until they got enough.
They wanted to do it, obviously.
Yeah.
Is there a general rule about cold, seeds that need cold? Would you go over that?
Well, plants that have fruit that gets ripe in the fall, a lot of those seeds need cold before they'll sprout. And it can be the simplest thing in the world. If it's not something that, like I said, the rats are gonna eat, if you plant them outdoors, and, you know, you can let them fall on the ground and sprout. We see that happen all the time. But if you actually take them and plant them, you kind of sort of know where they are. So if you plant them in the fall, they will get their cold over the winter. So unless it's something that you really, really are concerned about, that you want to kind of load the deck a little bit and make sure nothing happens to the seed, you can overwinter them in your refrigerator. But otherwise, you can just plant them outdoors and it'll be fine.
The pulpy seeds that you were talking about,
The which?
the seeds with pulp.
Oh, yes.
Do you ever allow it to ferment like you do with tomato seeds?
You can
Does
do that. You can do that,
Does that
yeah.
sort of help with the germination?
Yeah, so if you're saving tomato seeds, then you know what I'm talking about. So, yeah. So, getting the pulp off, they say the pulp has all kind of inhibitors and it can cause all kind of issues with microbes, bad microbes getting on the seeds. So, if you can get as much of the pulp off as possible, would be good. Yes?
What about seed depth? What's your general rule of thumb?
It depends on the size of the seed. Like the buckeye I was talking about is going to be about, the seed itself will be about that big. So you want to plant it at least twice that, so it would be that deep maybe, okay? That's probably 3 times, something like that. But like the hydrangea seed I passed around, you really, if you plant them when it's warm, they're up in 3 weeks. From experience, I know this. And I usually just scatter them on top of the soil. And in that case, Jackie, I would be watching them because they're right on top of the soil for water. And I probably would be watering them or checking them every day.
So the size of the seed is going to
determine the depth. Exactly. And these little seed, like we were talking about the hydrangeas and stuff like that, some people actually put a piece of glass or plastic or humidity dome on the top. But you still need to take it off and vent it occasionally or you'll get diseases. Yeah.
Do they need light to germinate?
Some do.
Some do, and I think hydrangeas do. Cardinal flower does, and that's another really great plant to grow from seed. Usually I don't cover cardinal flower. Somebody else have hand up.
Is there a list of seeds that need light to germinate?
Yes, you should be able to find that online. Just in fact, if they won't germinate without light, it's called photodormancy. So usually you can find something, you should be able to find something on the list. But little tiny seed, azaleas, I don't think you don't cover native azalea seed. Now those are tricky. And one of the things, that stories I love is Mr. Dodd, Tommy Dodd's dad, Tom Dodd, would clean his azalea seed like we did the hydrangeas. And he would dump them in a salt shaker, and then he would sift them on top of the soil. And so that distributes them evenly, more evenly than if you're trying to, something that size, trying to gradually put it out. So,
you mix sand.
yeah.
When you're watering those little tiny seeds, is it better to water from the bottom or mist from the top?
You can, but I miss from the top myself. And when I used to have a mist ditch, I would just like put those seeds in and during the first part of the germination and keep track that they weren't getting too much water, and then I would get them out. But misting is probably going to be the key to it. And you think you're being really careful when you're not moving them around, but they're so little, then when they sprout, you end up with a bunch at one end, no matter what you do. But even if you're not interested in propagating, to me it's amazing that something as big as an oak leaf hydrangea or a native azalea can grow from a seed that size in the wild. So if that can happen in the wild, you can do it. All right. Any other questions?
What about
Yes.
bottom heat?
What about what?
Bottom heat.
If you are growing, bottom heat is really for a nursery process where you're trying to speed up your crop. So bottom heat will help stuff get off to a good start. One thing that I think would benefit from bottom heat, if I had it recently, I grew a bunch of native grasses out from Mark Pastorick, and you have to wait so late, like in May. And if I'd had bottom heat, I think I could have got my seedlings up and made a crop quicker. Yeah.
This is a suggestion. If you've got a few seeds and you're worried that you won't ever see where they've sprouted,
dampen a paper towel after you soak them overnight, roll them up into